Nice to see everyone on this balmy morning in Eugene. I don't know how it is in Portland or other places. Hello to everyone online. Feel free to please shift around in your seat as you like, so you can see better, or just change positions so your body's more comfortable. So I wanted to start today by calling attention to the fact that there's a open theater of war in the world right now. Feels like to be true and under my own hips right now. I need to bring that heart forward, and I just wanted to share that there's been unexpected, or I don't know if it's expected or not, but a lot of grief in my life over the past 4 days or so. And seeing the images, the stories that have been coming out of Ukraine with the invasion. I've cried a lot. And just want to, encourage you or offer that as a gift of my own experience, and encourage you to take time as you need to pay attention to that. And, offer your prayers and well wishes and take care of your own suffering heart that's not separate from the suffering that's happening elsewhere. And of course, war has been happening all the time for probably the duration of my adult life. And actually, when I was born, January 17th, 1991, the U.S. invaded Iraq in Operation Desert Storm. Apparently my father, as he was caring for and attending to my mother diligently, was also over, I think, 3 days of labor, being in labor with me, that the Scud missiles were going off on the TV. He could see that was happening. And so, please take care. And if you feel called to offer a stick of incense and dedicate merit and well wishes, please do that. And if you're curious about how to do that, as we do in our tradition, you can ask anyone wearing robe or rakusu. So many people here are well skilled in that technology for opening our heart. And it's not about changing an outcome in the world, although it might lead you to some sort of action, donating money, going to a protest, but rather I do believe that it's not only good for your heart to do that, but it opens up an important well of compassion that we need to pour ourselves through in this life. Our wishes for peace. My dad said yesterday when we were talking on the phone that he hoped to finish the rest of his life without there being another war. I think we can all echo that sentiment. So to start my talk, I won't shift too far and talk about one of these central Buddhist concerns, and that is of dukkha. So this Pali word that we translate to as suffering most commonly. But I don't really connect too well with that word suffering. It feels too loose and all-inclusive, and dukkha is pointing to a very specific thing. And so I prefer the translation of anxiousness, dis-ease. Some people will use the term unsatisfactoriness, which comes quickly with the joke that that's a pretty unsatisfactory term. And so this suffering, this dukkha, it can be obvious in the acute external situations of pain and grief that we feel, also internal suffering that we feel very acutely, but it's also pointing to more subtle day-to-day anxiousness that really, if you start to look even a little bit, seems to drive so many of our actions. I once had a day where I felt like I was super on top of my life and getting things done and being responsive and lively. And that night I dreamt I was being chased by a dragon. And it made me think, how was I moving in the world? Was I actually running from something? And actually, as I did a little more investigation, it turns out I really was. There was something driving me to sort of conquer my life. So I think we can all have some recognition of how that moves in our life. There's a parable from the Lotus Sutra which theatrically imagines and images for us what life lived through this dukkha appears as. One way we can approach it through an image. And I'll share that with you now. There's an ancient house decaying and falling apart. Its great rooms are in dangerous condition, its pillars broken and rotting at the base, its beams and rafters askew and leaning, its foundation and steps in a state of collapse. The walls and partitions are cracked and broken, the plaster crumbling away, the thatch was in disorder and falling off. 500 people were staying in that house, with kites, owls, hawks and eagles, crows, magpies, pigeons and doves, lizards, snakes, vipers, scorpions, centipedes and millipedes, newts and ground beetles, weasels, ferrets, rats, and mice. All sorts of evil creatures scurried about everywhere. That house was frightening, extraordinary. All over the place were goblins, ogres, satyrs, evil spirits who devour human flesh, all sorts of poisonous insects. All of a sudden, the house caught on fire, and all at once, the house was engulfed in flames. Ridgepoles, beams, rafters, pillars exploded with a cracking roar and broke, split, and fell as walls and partitions collapsed. The demons and spirits bellowed and wailed. The hawks, vultures, and other birds, and Kumbanda demons and others were filled with fear and panic. Unable to escape, evil beasts and poisonous insects hid in their holes. Fire raging round their heads, tormented by hunger, thirst, and heat, hungry spirits rushed around, confused and terrified. Such was the state of that house, dreadful in the extreme, with horrid calamities and a great fire, with many disasters, not just a few. So that's an intense image. And the sutra goes on to say that there are children in this house, and they're so absorbed in their games and their toys and their playthings. I imagine they're, playing hide and seek, and Jimmy falls through the floor, and Jimmy's really good at hide and seek. They never find him. So this terrifying house, and being so absorbed in their games, the children don't think and don't recognize the wretchedness of the situation. They don't wonder, is this a great place to be? No. Could we get out of here? They're absorbed in their play. So, guess what? We, or I could at least say me, we are those children in the parable. That's what it's like to be a living being who relies on samsara, that the things, or samsaric existence of trying to find objects and external and internal situations to find peace of mind through. Because one of the foundational teachings of Buddhism is that all things that can come together will fall apart, right? This is foundational Buddhist teaching. Everything that we can work really hard to make a certain shape will eventually also collapse. Internal states, external objects. Nation states have risen and crumbled forever. Ukrainians and Russian soldiers and civilians basically woke up to violence and war on their front doorstep. I think those of us living here in Eugene and also in Portland, we're so close to, we're witnessing and a part of a community with a deep housing crisis. And really, if you're not experiencing it now, how close are all of us to living with that kind of very difficult external situation? Any shape of our government, personal finances, relationships, physical and mental ability that we rely upon, are all subject to forces beyond our control. So even when things are going well, can you feel that sometimes? The subtle, gosh, this is great. This is good for now. How do I keep it going? How do I keep it going? And of course, it's easy to see on a large external level, but also in the day-to-day, the moments, the subtle, awkward interactions that totally fill up our life. One of the places I actually think I do enjoy this. I enjoy to study this dukkha, is riding public transportation. Who here rides the bus occasionally, now and again? I'm not doing it so much, but someone gets on the bus and you can feel their slight elation when there's an open seat with no one next to them, someone scoops that up right away. And then maybe someone's bold enough to set their backpack on the empty seat next to them, sort of making it very difficult for someone to come and take that seat next to them, to impinge upon their distancing from people, right? And one time while I was going to school here from the temple, when I was still at the University of Oregon, I was both horrified and I thought it was hilarious that people weren't willing or able to see that there was like 80% of the passengers were in the front of the bus, and people just kept coming on and people kept getting tighter and tighter till finally the bus driver had to say, please, someone move to the back of the bus, make room for everyone. So there are these ways we get narrowed and are so protective of our space. And some protection and boundaries are so important to our life, but you can see the ways that this is also a root of our anxious churning, moment by moment. Sawaki Kodo Roshi, Zen revivalist teacher born in the late 1800s, Soto Zen monk, he said that, we call this life normal because we've gotten used to it. So can we feel how this image of the burning house, maybe it's not always like that the intensity of that image, but it's shaking us from our sense to merely eke out an existence in this house. Even though it does at times seem fairly reasonable that humans are neurotic. It's all falling apart all the time. There's so much dysfunction. It seems fairly reasonable to try and find a room that seems like it might burn down last, and find something absorbing and interesting to keep our attention occupied and lively. And yet in the parable it says, and flames all at once, everywhere all at once, engulfed the house. So the Buddhist admonition, wake up. There's really no safe place that we can just hunker down, that we have to be aware of this impermanence and living our life through it rather than avoiding it. And so Buddhism usually starts there in offering the bad news, the tough part, the challenges, the symptoms of suffering in life. But I'll also offer some good news, the hallelujah moment, in that there's a path, and that there's such a thing as extinguishing the flames of our suffering of that dukkha. Basic Buddhism, Four Noble Truths, what the Buddha woke up and taught his 5 friends after he was said to attain awakening under the Bodhi tree. And so again, not that the path in developing certain qualities and certain insights can chiropract the world into a good shape, and that's where we find our ease, or even that we'll feel good all the time. But rather, our heart can indeed be steady through and encounter problems through the very fray of impermanence. As Ejo spoke of last week, the fires of impermanence, not only may become a source of our spiritual vibrancy in our engagement with the world, but really they are indeed the source. Another quote from the Lotus Sutra here that's so important. When living beings see the kalpa's end with all consumed in a great blaze, and this is the Buddha speaking here, my domain stays serene and calm, ever filled with human and heavenly beings, gardens and groves, pavilions and palaces, adorned with every kind of gem, and jeweled trees lush with flowers and fruit, where living beings delight and play, all consumed in a great blaze. So, what's the solution? How do we extinguish this dukkha, this fear, this anxiety? And that is the path. In the Buddha's time, it was the Eightfold Path, which in our tradition and lineage here in this community, we commonly talk about path through the 6 perfections, and it correlates with that Eightfold Path. So those perfections, those practices, those are generosity. So be generous, be ethical, be patient and learn to forbear difficulty, cultivate good energy, and become sensitive and concentrated. And that's usually through the practice of meditation. And lastly, be wise. That one's a little tricky, isn't it? It's meant to be. And that wisdom is really about the nature of this impermanence. That we have no distance from the ever-changing world. We're totally connected to other beings, the flux and flow of life. So when we hear that path, we can think, great, let's do it. And we should have that kind of energy. And we can learn that as we explore each of these facets of cultivating a stable heart in the impermanence and challenges of life, that we can extend ourselves bit by bit. So with generosity, give a little more. Give a little more. And equally, and become more nuanced and full in that practice of generosity, discern where your boundaries are and become clear with them with other people. Those are both facets of generosity. So it's not just a simplistic drink coffee all the time to get your energy, right? What's the energy within our lethargy? Where's the kind of vibrancy that doesn't just have a simplistic sheen of energy over it? And so we can take these qualities and we can step by step work with them. And if we do this, our hearts and our lives will definitely improve. Definitely. And there's a subtle trap there. And the trap is that we can also, when we give over to this step-by-step modality of thinking, that we can easily replicate our to-do list mindset, as I call it in my life. One of my dear friends and fellow practitioner and Dharma brothers from a long time ago, he said, we need to be careful not to should all over ourselves. Don't should all over yourself. So we simply replicate our conditions of suffering and place our inadequacies into an idealized image of what we should be doing. And again, we cultivate seeds of anxiety through that. I think it's almost inevitable that if you come to any spiritual tradition, you will encounter that. And in fact, that's good. You should definitely know that it's not just a straight shot to awakening, but our whole fleshy, messy being has to come here. And here's where the teaching, I think, of our particular lineage really shines, and the founder of our school, Dogen Zenji, somewhere in the 14th century in Japan, taught this form of Buddhism that informs us today. And one of his main teachings was that practice and awakening are one. Those are to be used together. He would say, practice awakening. And so how could it be when our idea of generous giving also corresponds to a heart that doesn't know limit? And that's a tricky point. That's a confusing thing to think about. And drawing boundaries and giving. So for example, when I come up against the reality of, say, how much money I have, and I want to donate money to community-supported shelters, the folks who build these amazing Conestoga huts for people who are experiencing houselessness, to have some reprieve and a steady place in their life, that we can have a heart that says, if I had everything, I would give you everything. If I had unlimited time to hang out and play with you, my child, oh, I would do that. And maybe I'd want to break sometimes. But also, I would do that. And because my life is the shape it's in, we can go for an hour today. Maybe an hour 15, right? we can marinate these ideas of limit and this idea of boundless giving. They can live together without opposing each other. But so quickly, we get caught by the shapes and the limits of our life. So I think this practice in awakening is pointing to that possibility. That's a way we can live human life. How many of you have the experience of coming upon a good plan in your mind and thinking it's going to save you from your difficulties? Right? Yeah. Show our hands. Look around. You can look at each other and be like, yeah, me too. So I think of it particularly in terms of conversations. Like you're going into what you are pretty sure will be a difficult conversation, and you get your battle plan already. Even where that's the moment where I'm going to be really compassionate and caring, right? And then I'm going to stay firm and say this, this, and this. We need to have that oftentimes, but how often does it also get in our way? So that rigidity appears before us instead of cultivating a sense of connection with the truth that we need to bring forward, and the prioritizing the connection with another person and trusting the movement will happen as it needs to. An image of this, mixing practice and limits and awakening, a heart of great connection and depth. And so, although we can be tripped up by these ideas sometimes, I'm very grateful that practices of Buddhism have sort of an innate self-destruct button. So someone I study often, his name is James Hillman, he's a student of Carl Jung. He told a story where he was, someone asked a Zen teacher, what is a useful concept? What's a useful concept? And the Zen teacher replied, the concept that dissolves itself. The concept that dissolves itself. So I think of meditation as one of these kinds of concepts, this idea. It's something we can teach about and talk about, and when you sit down and encounter the reality of this meditation, completely different, completely alive, and our simplistic ideas about how it will go or your good plan, they quickly crumble before you. And so we're thrust upon that lively, energetic edge. That's exactly what it's hoping to do. And so meditation is one way we, in our school, cultivate that bright, intimate heart. But there are other ways too. And one way that I think is tremendously neglected, especially in the West, or maybe in the West, something I could say, is what I like to think of as washing ourselves in images. And it's something that we do here at the temple on a regular basis, in addition to meditation and meeting with a teacher and kind of study at times. And so just before this talk right now and before sitting, we chanted together. We chanted teachings, and the important thing wasn't that you abstracted the meaning from many of those teachings, but that we encountered some of the images and let it flow through us and let them go. And then we just encountered our body. And every morning we chant teachings and sutras that are very poetic. They're wonderfully illuminating and trying to tease out what is the quality of awakened living. What's it like? A stone woman gets up dancing. A wooden man starts to sing. Where does that go around in your good plan for how to wake up and be a better person? So these images can carry a power that we don't quite know what to do with. And they're really in there lies the jewel. And so for many of you, I think we also encounter this in reading poetry and exploring and learning about the natural world. For me, oftentimes that's Planet Earth or Life, the series Life. I think they have a Life 2, right, as well? Does anyone watch Life? Is that? Okay, yeah. They use the drones. Very exciting. And also studying myths, other religions, ancient and different societies. How do learning about these ideas and the ways that the world can work, act as a plow on our sort of concentrated or compacted dirt of our soul and open us up to new possibilities. So this is an everyday thing that I think we're used to. And in our religious tradition, there are important images that open us to awakening through the profundity of the image. And we can cultivate an ethic of exploring these images. So I've mentioned the Lotus Sutra a couple of times now, and I'll be relying on this sutra over a series of talks in the coming couple of months to really work with these images and explore and unfurl the Dharma through the teachings and images that it offers. So as best as scholars can guess, this teaching was composed 400 years or so after the Buddha passed away, over a period of 300 years, give or take. It's really hard when you look at the scholarship to figure out what's going on there. And it's funny, as you read it, you can really feel it was composed over 300 years. There's sort of subtly and not so subtly conflicting views, or someone was like, that's way too conservative. So they put this kind of radical chapter in front of it. And it seems like there were sutras and teachings that were circulating independently that ended up being all smushed together in this Lotus Sutra. And so it holds together as this very beautiful and sort of spontaneous feeling exploration. And what they stay true to, I'd say they stay true to through the entire sutra is staying close to images rather than just explaining. There's a fair amount of explanation, but they hug up and get near to fantastical imagery that's really challenging and pushing us beyond. And they're following the thread of the question, what is it entailed in becoming a Buddha? What's that like? Can it be done quickly? Does it take a long time? Will you even know it's happening? Will you not know if it's not happening? And they're following the thread of this question in all these fantastical ways. So it offers us an imaginative display that I'd say can ignite our own sense of the actual, rather than just coming to explanations, metaphysical maps, or moral imperatives. As in the parable of the burning house, this approach explicates reality through fantastical imagery. Right? Ursula Le Guin, science fiction writer, novelist, contemporary, passed away a couple of years ago. She said that truth is a matter of the imagination. How jarring does that feel or sound? Really we think truth is about facts. Give me the facts. But I'd say that imagination is a fact of another kind. And she also has a fun one. Those who do not believe in dragons are often eaten by dragons, but from within. Those who do not believe in dragons are often eaten by dragons from within. So really, magic and simplicity of art, fictional stories, poetry, points us towards the depth of things. I'm fond of a quote by a 4th century Roman mystic, Sallustius, who said, "Myths are things that never happened, but always are." Never happened, always are. Not laid out in time, but pointing in, turn 90 degrees and pointing us to the depth of our heart. Have any of you been moved deeply by nonsensical, confusing, illogical dream? A random, unexplainable, spontaneous dream image that courses through your life like a train and invokes beauty and terror in a way that, of course, we can't comprehend it. it's not asking us to comprehend it. It's trying to wake us up to something through a poetic distortion. And so how do you care for that dream? Do we just try and reduce it to our understanding or operationalize it? Or do we somehow keep the fire of it alive? We ask it questions. We ask, what is the giant black snake? What's the giant black snake? And why is it in my childhood bedroom? So they offer us another kind of path. So this is the terrain, the natural artery of our being that I think the Lotus Sutra is plugging into, it moves through. So I'd like to share, in a fairly full way, a primary and central story within the Lotus Sutra. So I'll set the scene a little bit. We're about halfway through the sutra, and the Lotus Sutra itself is filled with story after story within a story. So stories upon stories, it's quite fractalic in that nature. And this story is told by the Buddha, and the other stories are told by various other beings there, both human and non-human. So they're talking about supreme awakening, the best of the best, how to do it fast and how to do it well, how to become a Buddha. So disbelieving monks and mythical characters alike, they sort of tease the dialogue forward with clarifying the meaning of supernatural happenings and hard-to-believe statements by the Buddha. So the scene right now is currently a massive assembly of all kinds of beings, including serpents, or nagas, griffins, chimeras, and satyrs, as well as innumerable other Buddhas and their attendants who've come from other worlds. And of course, at this point in the sutra, everyone's floating in midair, right? We could have seen that coming. So we'll just read this here now for you. So amidst all this hullabaloo, the attendant of one of these innumerable Buddhas, named Accumulated Wisdom, he asks, is there any living being who can quickly become a Buddha? The Bodhisattva Manjushri, the archetypal image of wisdom, seated over there, just to Ejo's right. He responds, there's a daughter of the dragon king Sagara. Just 8 years old, she is wise and has sharp faculties, and is well acquainted with the faculties and actions of living beings. She has been able to receive and embrace all the profound inner core treasures preached by the Buddhas. Within a moment, she aspired to become awakened and reached the state of never backsliding. Compassionate and respectful of others, kind and gentle, she is able to attain awakening quickly. She appears right there in front of the assembly, praises the Buddha, saying that she can awaken in an instant thanks to his compassionate teachings. Shariputra, who's now a being lived corporeally with the Buddha 2,500 years ago, one of the most wisest, accomplished monks of that time, he says, how could you become a Buddha in an instant? Only after innumerable years of enduring hardship, accumulating good works, and thoroughly carrying out all practices can awakening be reached. And in response, the dragon girl took a precious jewel that she had with her, worth as much as a 3,000 great thousand-fold world, and presented it to the Buddha. The Buddha immediately accepted it. Then the entire congregation saw her transform into a Buddha and become a teacher and leader of men and gods alike. The chapter ends with the statement that Accumulated Wisdom Bodhisattva and Shariputra and the whole congregation silently believed and accepted this. Kind of a drop the mic moment. Peace. So good old Accumulated Wisdom and Shariputra were bested, shown up by the sincerity and offering that the dragon princess could make. And she immediately makes an offering of this precious jewel. And the Buddha immediately accepts it. You can if you would like to. You can close your eyes right now, and if I say precious jewel, and if you image that scene, what does the jewel look like for you? And for me, it's large, about the size of a fist. It doesn't fit well in a pocket. And the center is almost a black, dark red. And it has some shiny, very crisp sides, but also has some gnarled edges, showing that it came up from the earth. Not too polished. And that's an image that I get when I take that story in and put my own flesh and blood into it. And there's another story in the Lotus Sutra about a rich friend, or a rich couple of friends. Sorry, one man is rich, the other is not rich. And in fact, they have a party, and this man, one of the more poor man, he gets drunk and falls asleep. And his buddy, who has quite a number of resources, is quite worried about him and is sensing that his world is not all right. And so he takes a precious jewel, again here the precious jewel, and sews it into his cloak. And because he knows if he tries to wake him or even put it in the guy's pocket, he's definitely going to lose it. It's not going to go well. So he sews it in his cloak. And in the morning, the man wakes up and leaves, and he doesn't know it's there. And they meet each other sometime later, and the man who has the jewel in his cloak, he's wandering destitute in poverty, not doing well. And the friend says, what's going on? Didn't you get the jewel? He said, oh, no. So he takes it. Imagine, it's so funny to think about, a big lump. I wondered what that was. And he takes it out and can make his life work. He receives a gift. In the same chapter about the dragon princess, the Buddha tells the assembly that the main troublemaker of the Buddha's life 2,500 years ago, a fellow named Devadatta, that he will become a Buddha. All the monks find this very hard to believe. Devadatta was the Buddha's cousin, and troublemaker is a very soft word. He tried to kill the Buddha by rolling a boulder down the hill. He tried to split the Sangha by taking many of the Buddha's monks and say, you're not practicing hard. You're not practicing hard enough. The way is, the Buddha is flawed. Come with me. He also paid a woman to pretend she was pregnant and accused the Buddha of being the husband. Of course, the Buddha wins in the end. She's found out. The balloon falls out. So, not a good fellow. Really problematic. But even you, Devadatta, I see that there is sincerity and the seeds of Buddhahood within you. Even you will become a Buddha. There's also a chapter in the Lotus Sutra called Bodhisattva Never Disrespectful. And Jike is smiling over here, a devotee of the Lotus Sutra. Bodhisattva Never Disrespectful. He spends his career as a bodhisattva wandering around and telling other beings. Let me find the page. He says, because all of you are practicing the Bodhisattva way, you will surely become Buddhas. And this Bodhisattva monk did not devote himself to reading or reciting sutras, but simply went around bowing to people. If he saw the four groups off in the distance, he would make a point of going up to them, bowing in obeisance, and praising them, saying, I would never dare to disrespect you, because surely you are all to become Buddhas. So eventually, a couple of monks get pretty annoyed by this. Various people are a little tired of it. Who are you to tell me that I am to become a Buddha? And they start to throw sticks at him and rocks. So he goes from a distance and he sort of yells that phrase, surely you're to become a Buddha. He was probably even more annoyed. And so I won't explain these too much, these stories. I don't think that's not so helpful to extract the meaning. And getting the true meaning or the real metaphor isn't really the point. But how, when we receive them, do they point and turn our mind towards this idea of awakening? What does becoming liberated have to do with discovering? Well, first being offered, and discovering a jewel, and then instantly making an offering of it. How does true freedom relate with being aware of the Buddhahood of even the most seemingly cruel and ignorant beings? Outside of us? Inside of us? Those beings we think, surely you'll never wake up. Not only worthless, but detrimental to the cause. They live outside, they live inside. And these stories inviting us to awakening that doesn't banish them, but instead has profound faith in them. You can bring this into your meditation practice. You can ask yourself as you sit there, just softly, what is this precious jewel? You can contemplate the image of, what does it mean to have faith in my delusion? Moment by moment appearing in our hearts. And so I know many of you aren't Buddhists, and even many of you who consider yourself Buddhists may never open the Lotus Sutra. I encourage you to contemplate freedom through images as they come naturally to your life and your faculties and inspiration, and music and poetry. And not just, I think it's so easy, we have such a thin relationship with the endless amounts of images that are in our world that we just have a sense that playing in these realms is just for relief from suffering. It's something to do. It's entertainment. But that actually we can approach them as a playfulness and a curiosity in the depths of our beings. We can turn them vertically and allow them help us to explore the value of a human life. These things that are just readily present in our life. And it's the nature of each thing, a blade of grass. Show us the depth of mind. And so rather than simply just harboring step-by-step ideas of practice and awakening and bettering our lives, which is super important, please do that, please have that idea, but also we can have something that's much more precious and mysterious be a warming factor within our walking in the world. And that we can become like a great pot, a boiling cauldron for both awakening and beauty and also our delusion. All of them playing in there, meeting each other seamlessly. I think this is the heart of our school, the vision of the Mahayana, bringing to full fruition practice and awakening is one thing. Each step, all the way in the depth. It also doesn't beat up the shallow. Depth and shallow don't have to oppose each other. So inspired by the Lotus Sutra, I offer this capping verse. And touching each desire with faithful imagination, what dragon princess appears from the depth? Hosts of ancient Buddhas lay dormant in the spacious earth. Roused from slumber, each begins their own journey home. So we have a few minutes for questions here. Linda?
So I'm very curious about whatever became of the Dragon Princess. Did she then go on to found a school or sit at the right hand of Buddha, or what happened to her?
So she was transported to her own Buddha realm. So this is something, if you read the Lotus Sutra, you'll see again and again. And this is a really amazing and surprising image that when we think, I think when we naturally feel into the idea of Buddha, there's kind of like all of your personality is cut off, right? A Buddha is just knows the perfect truth and dispenses it sort of objectively. But each Buddha in this cosmos and imagining of worlds and innumerable realms has their own name, their own specific name. And I forget hers off the top of my head. And they also have the name of a realm. And they have a lifespan of how long how long they live, and how long their formal teachings survive for within the realm. So within impermanence, the appearance of a Buddha actually doesn't last, right? We've heard about that mythology here in the hall before, that there's a time where it turns from formal dharma into mimicking dharma. I forget the actual term of it, like just going through the motions, and then a time where it disappears. So to answer your question, part of that transformation process, she up and goes to this sacred realm, and it has a shape and a color, and the ground is often a certain color or a certain sacred material, like lapis lazuli or crystal, and that's where they live out their Buddhahood. So that's what becomes of her. And it doesn't have to be questions, you can just have comments if you like. Anything you liked or didn't like.
I really enjoyed your discussion of how we set up plans for ourselves as far as like things that are going to be good for us. And I know what the answer is, it's da 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 da. And then like having that answer is actually causes greater anxiety, because that was really something helpful for me to think about this morning. So I appreciated that teaching.
Yeah, totally. How do you have a sense of where you can smell that happening in yourself, and how you work to come back to your center? I think we all have little ways we do that. We feel that tightness appearing, and then we think we recognize that's just going to be a problem, and then we come back on our hips some way or another. Do you want to share a way that you might come to that?
Not at the moment.
Yeah. That felt like a great way to get back on your hips, to be honest. It's like, nope, not now. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, James.
So we have a house filled with ogres and goblins and insects and snakes and various angry birds and children at play. Children are let out from the house. They're lured out. What happened to all the ogres and the snakes and the goblins? Do they eventually get lured out?
No. Not in the story.
Okay. So
Many of them are caught, they catch fire and are eaten by each other. Something that I think is challenging for this sutra, for people when reading this sutra, is it doesn't make such an effort to holistically save every living thing or count everything in. It's really aiming these stories to be for the human being. So for example, I don't really appreciate it calling all sorts of evil beasts, like including mice in that. It's kind of ridiculous to our sensibility about the natural beauty and importance of all living creatures. We tend towards this holistic sense. The sutra is not afraid to just say that, nope, we're not going to talk about that. It might, if it had time, go back into that, but it's not so interested. And really, James, where this is challenging for a lot of people, in I'll spend time talking about this particular parable, or not parable, it happens within the sutra that beings come forward in the assembly and they beg the Buddha to teach. They say, please expound the most beautiful, subtle, supreme dharma for us. And the Buddha says, no, it will just confuse everyone. It's so subtle. And they have this back and forth 3 times. And after the Buddha relents, 5,000 arrogant monks and nuns stand up and leave the assembly. It's very interesting. I don't know of anywhere else this happens in Buddhist literature. And everyone always asks, what about them? Right? Don't they deserve to receive the Dharma? And I think here it's being used less as thinking about them as they're parts of the story, parts of our psyche, our being. They symbolize arrogance. They symbolize the view that thinks it has it. I don't even want to say they symbolize it. I want to back off those words. The part of us that knows what it is, what life is about, what's important, what's true. If we're churning those thoughts and placing energy there, we will not be able to receive the subtle truth of human life. We will be caught again and again by thinking we know what it is. So it's not concerned in saying, well, them too. It's just saying, the sincere heart disbands arrogance. I think it offers that through the story. So it's kind of jarring, I think, for people of our time and our sense of wholeness that we really value and inclusion, which I think have really good sides. And it doesn't pay much heed to making sure that kind of energy is taken care of.
Genjo?
Hi.
Hi, I would like to really thank you for including poetry and music and other forms of imagery in the kinds of things that can awaken us. So, I play guitar and I spend a lot of time with music, and sometimes I beat myself up because I don't sit as much as I think I should. And that just felt really generous to me, so thank you.
Yeah. You're so welcome, and it feels right and true to me. Yeah. Thank you.